Welcome to Intersect, where church meets culture. My name is Josh Desch. I'm the lead pastor at Northeast Presbyterian Church in wonderful Columbia, South Carolina, and I am joined, as always, by my blithesome wife, Betsy.
Blithesome,
a person of cheerful disposition.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Are you feeling blithesome today?
Very much so. I'm happy to be here. It's going to be great.
It's going to be great. Well, we're so glad that you're back joining us, and we've got a wonderful episode. We're going to talk about a book that you're going to want to read, you're going to want to know about. And so the title of this Intersect episode is Read This. Read this, exclamation point, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Seen by David Brooks. Mm-hmm. He just wrote this book in 2023, and I feel like it's just starting to get some broader traction. He's talking about it in a lot of different podcasts and so forth. Betsy, tell me about this book. Why do we need this book? Why do you like this book? And let's get into it.
Okay, so yes, I read this book actually over the course of a week, and it's got a very pretty cover.
It does. That helps.
Pretty colors, yes. And what I would say is, first of all, it's easy to read. He's a good author. It was very engaging. I read it fairly quickly, which is not always the case for me with this kind of book. But he's a very good author, very easy to read. And so the main point of this book was really how to be a person who connects well with other people. So the point that he's trying to make is, we think of people as being gifted socially or maybe like not gifted socially.
Introvert, extrovert, things like that.
All these different kind of categories. And the point that he's trying to make in this book is that many of the connecting tools that we need are skills that we can improve in. If you're someone who feels like you're not a natural born connector, there are skills that he's outlining in this book that he says, hey, these will help you to connect better with people. So the thing that he's seeing is that our culture is no longer investing a lot into training people how to connect. And so we see increasing loneliness and division. That's kind of the point he's making.
And maybe we could compare this a little bit to cursive and to spelling, both of which are things kids don't know how to do anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
Nobody knows how to write cursive. In fact, my kids can't even read my regular handwriting because I've got everything. It's got a little, occasional loop or something in there. But also spelling, we can't spell. We don't do cursive. I feel like David Brooks is saying in this book, and David is a wonderful author, very thoughtful person, longtime op-ed writer for the New York Times, also a writer for The Atlantic, formerly Jewish, has converted to Christianity. He is saying that some of this was ingrained in our culture more in the past, right? There has been a loss in different ways of how do we connect with each other, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, I want to read a quote. So it's a longer quote to kind of set up why he wrote this book, as you alluded to. So this is what he says. Being open-hearted is a prerequisite for being a full, kind, and wise human being, but it's not enough. People need social skills. We talk about the importance of relationships, community, friendship, social connection, but these words are too abstract. The real act of, say, building a friendship or creating a community involves performing a series of small, concrete social actions well. So this is his list of some examples of those social actions. Disagreeing without poisoning the relationship, revealing vulnerability at an appropriate pace, being a good listener, knowing how to end a conversation gracefully, knowing how to ask for and offer forgiveness, knowing how to let someone down without breaking their heart, knowing how to sit with someone who is suffering, knowing how to host a gathering where everyone feels embraced, knowing how to see things from another's point of view. These are some of the most important skills a human being can possess, and yet we don't teach them in school. Some days it seems like we have intentionally built a society that gives people little guidance on how to perform the most important activities of life, and as a result, a lot of us are lonely and lack deep friendships. So he's saying, friendships and relationships are built on these small, concrete social actions. And that's what he's saying. Hey, you can get better in this.
Yeah.
You can learn how to connect with people better.
And I like that he is getting beyond superficial statements like you need friends or you need to be in relationships. he's saying, of course, but there's not enough description in terms of how these things actually work. And we need to remember that these are essential qualities of friendship.
Yes.
Like vulnerability, like disagreeing, which is something we could definitely talk about, because it kind of feels like we're in a moment now where if you disagree with somebody about anything, they shouldn't be your friend.
Right.
And you need to just sort of get them out of your tribe. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes. Yeah. So he talks, that's one thing he really talks about in the book, is how to disagree with someone well. And he covers a lot of really great stuff. So the point he's making is that the skill that we need to have these deep relationships that we want is, as he says, the ability to see someone else deeply and make them feel seen. So we can dive into it. I found it really insightful. Some of it was intuitive, you know, especially as a believer who wants to love people well. Some of it I found intuitive, but a lot of it was great and really good stuff, and I'll take a lot from it.
So now one of the things I like about David Brooks is he does not generally write for a Christian audience. Mm-hmm. He writes for a much broader audience.
Right.
So what if someone is coming at this book with a skeptical position and they're saying, what if I don't really care?
Yeah.
Why do I really need these things? I'm happy in my life. I'm happy spending a lot of time on social media or whatever it is, and I'm not convinced I need these things. What do you think Brooks' answer to that is?
Yeah, well, he makes the great point that I'm actually going to read from the book, because I didn't write this quote in my notes, but it's really a good one. So, you know, behavioral psychology, whether you're a believer, whether you're not, has proven time and time again that, as he says, social connection is the number one source of happiness, success, good health, and much of the sweetness of life. So everyone knows that in order to live a happy and full life, you need human connection.
And meaning,
period.
Yeah,
The end.
And meaningful human
That's right.
connection.
Everyone needs that.
And he says, I want to help you know how to do that.
Right.
You know who the Kelsey brothers are, Bets?
Yes.
Unfortunately.
I don't know where you're going with this.
So it's Jason and Travis. Travis is the tight end for the Chiefs.
I'm just not a Swiftie. I'm sorry.
No, that's cool.
I just went on the record.
Well, I'm not
sorry.
either.
Yeah.
I'm not either. But anyway, Jason is the offensive lineman for the Eagles. And the two brothers, they do a podcast together. And they recently had Shaq on.
Oh.
And he's one of those people, there's not that many people in our culture that you can just say one name and
Yeah.
everyone immediately knows.
So true.
Like everyone immediately knows that Shaq is Shaquille O'Neal, the former NBA basketball player.
That's funny.
And it's actually a little bit sad. This has gotten some attention on social media, but Jason Kelsey was asking Shaq advice about retirement because he's thinking about retiring from the NFL. And Shaq said, love your family, value your family, because you don't want to end up like me by yourself in a 100,000 square foot home.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was kind of one of those really raw, honest moments where somebody who has it all, I mean, I feel like Shaq is still on a ton of commercials and he's got to have more money than he ever could spend in 100 lifetimes. But he's lonely.
Yeah.
And he admitted that to the whole world. So relationships really matter for whoever you are. And David Brooks wants to help us get better at those.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so how do we do it?
So the main structure of the book, I think this is kind of the idea that the book hangs on, that is that some people are what he calls illuminators and some people are diminishers. Okay. So we'll get into what that means. He doesn't spend a lot of time on what he calls diminishers other than giving some defining characteristics. But most of the book is spent on how to develop the habit of being a person who illuminates
So obviously
others.
you want to be an illuminator. You don't want to be a diminisher or a dementor. Or,
And we'll talk about what he means by illuminator, but let's start with diminishers. So this is what he says. Diminishers make people feel small and unseen. They see other people as things to be used, not as persons to be befriended. They stereotype and ignore. They are so involved with themselves that other people are just not on their radar screens. And then when we look to an illuminator, This is how he defines those people. Illuminators, on the other hand, have a persistent curiosity about other people. They have been trained or have trained themselves in the craft of understanding others. They know what to look for and how to ask the right questions at the right time. They shine the brightness of their care on people and make them feel bigger, deeper, respected, and lit up. Hence, Illuminator.
I love that.
And I would say, obviously, everyone is a person who diminishes other people sometimes,
Sure.
right? There's never anyone who is fully in either category at all times.
Yeah, we're not all shining perfectly all the time.
Right. And most people aren't fully diminishing others at all times.
Sure.
We're kind of probably somewhere in between.
But he gives this cool list of the reasons why we are diminishers. He's got 7 different mindsets, right?
Yes.
About share this. Because this is really, to me, this was really illuminating to think about why.
See what you did there.
Yeah, there you go. Why are we diminishers? Why are some people diminishers most of the time? Why are some of us diminishers? Dementors. I got Harry Potter in my mind. Last time
kind of the same idea.
It was a joke, yeah. Okay, so get into egotism is the first one.
Yeah, so he talks about these are inborn proclivities that prevent us from perceiving others accurately. So yes, first is egotism. It's all about me. He says we're unable to step outside of our own points of view, and we are simply not curious about other people. So I think that's certainly where everyone starts, at least. If you think about a child, they're curious about a lot of things, but they're pretty much in their own point of view.
Yeah, in many ways, growing as a Christian is making it less about you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the second one is anxiety. There's just so much noise in our own heads sometimes that we can't look beyond that.
And we've all met people, and we've all maybe had times ourselves where anxiety felt like I can only focus on myself right now.
Yep.
But if we stay in that place, then we're trapped in a prison of never getting beyond ourselves.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
The third one is naive realism. And this one really spoke to me. It's the assumption that the way the world appears to you is the objective view, and therefore everyone else must see the same reality you do. People in the group of naive realism are so locked into their own perspective, they can't appreciate that other people have very different perspectives. I think that hits home for a lot of us. Definitely hits home for me.
And this is so, if we just pause here for a second. Well, I'll make a comment about politics. Actually, go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is the lesser minds problem. So that's the perception that I am much more complicated than you, deeper, more interesting, more subtle, and more high-minded. Because you're hearing the internal traffic in your head, but you don't hear what anyone else is thinking about, right?
I think these two, naive realism and the lesser minds problem, really impact the dialogue that happens in our culture around politics. Where number one, people are just do not make an attempt to try to see things the way another person is seeing them.
Right.
And then there's that diminishment of the person of, well, they're not as smart as me. They're not
a simpleton.
They're just not able to see this on the level that I'm able to see it on.
Right. So 3 left on the list. Objectivism, which is just like collecting data about a group, believing that people are just data that fit into a group.
Yeah, that's very much stereotyping, I feel
Yes. Yep. And that goes into the 6th aspect of diminishing, which is essentialism. And he defines that as the belief that certain groups actually have an essential and immutable nature. Essentialists imagine that people in one group are more alike than they really are. They are guilty of stacking. This is the practice of learning one thing about a person, then making a whole series of further assumptions about that person. So because I know that you eat organic food, I also know that you must
drive a Prius.
And use crunchy deodorant and whatever else it may be. So,
What do you mean crunchy deodorant?
Like crunchy, like
okay, good. You don't eat that.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, this is not going where I wanted.
All right.
What I mean is like the earth-friendly deodorant.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, let's just
no bad chemicals in that stuff.
Yeah, that's a rabbit trail. All right. And then the 7th and final is a static mindset. So that's not changing your view of a person over time. In your mind, they're who they were a long time ago.
Which of us haven't, Bets, had the experience of you go back either to a setting that people knew you as a kid.
Yes.
You come back to a family reunion, you see a family member, and you see that the person is not able to experience you now as a more mature person.
Right.
And that every way they see you, you're still little Johnny who was 11 or 7 or 4 or 15.
Right.
And
or
people can't appreciate your growth and your development.
Yeah. Or like, this is what you enjoyed when you were 20. So this is probably what you still enjoy now. Or yeah. Not allowing for personal growth. So those are the mindsets on diminishers. So now that was really the only thing that he said particularly about being a diminisher. The rest of the book is spent on how to illuminate in relationships. And several things stood out. And y'all, there's so much in this book that we can't talk about just for the sake of time, but it's well worth reading. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is he highlights the importance of patience in relationships. And I feel like we talked about this. Remember when we talked about the Friends episode earlier this season, we talked about how to have good friendships, meaningful friendships after Matthew Perry passed away.
Yeah.
And I feel like patience was something that we talked about then, like being patient through all of the different phases that friendships take on the way to get deeper, because, you've got that awkward stage where you're kind of feeling each other out. And he highlights the importance of patience, just sitting in that and not trying to rush past it.
That's good.
Yeah. And also he highlighted playfulness, which I know is something that we talked about in that episode on friendship before, is when you play with someone, you're bringing out a part of their personality that you may not see in a different setting. Mm-hmm. So he highlighted the importance of both of those things. Another thing he highlighted that I loved was learning to step out of my point of view and trying to step into yours, which is what we talked about when we spoke on the diminishers. So to see how you construct meaning and reality in your life. So this is what he said. If we're going to become illuminators, we need to first ask questions and engage with answers. We need to ask, how does this look to you? Do you see the same situation I see? Then we need to ask, what are the experiences and beliefs that cause you to see it this way? For example, I might ask, what happened to you in childhood that makes you see that makes you still see the world from the vantage point of an outsider? What was it about your home life that makes celebrating holidays and hosting dinner parties so important to you? You hate asking for favors. Why is that such an issue for you? As we have these conversations, we're becoming more aware of the models we use to construct reality. We're getting to know each other better. We're also getting to know ourselves better. Mm-hmm. So I found that so interesting because it's true. As you try to step into the shoes of someone else and see something from their perspective, that also does help you to see yourself better, to see your history better, to kind of come to grips with that.
Yeah, that's what I really loved about what he did here with Illuminators was I loved how he talked about hearing people's stories and getting past like little bits of information about them and getting them to open up and actually, and a lot of times this is only going to happen over a meal or over some quality time that you're actually spending together. Mm-hmm. But when you can find out things about people, how they grew up, what their experience was like, if you're a Christian, hey, what was your Christian journey? I'm not just going to make tons of assumptions about that. How did you get from where you are to where you are today? Mm-hmm. I feel like that goes so far in really understanding a person.
Yep. Yeah. So talked about the importance of trying to understand someone from another perspective. Another great thing he talks about, and I know most people know this when you talk about relationships, but he talks about asking good questions of other people. And obviously that's kind of the cornerstone of having good conversations is you have to open it with something, right? But I loved what he said here. He said, when you are asking a good question, you're adopting a posture of humility. You're confessing that you don't know and you want to learn. You're also honoring a person because you're saying, hey, I want to learn this about you. I want to know this about you. This is important to me. So humble questions are open-ended. They're encouraging the other person to take control and take the conversation where they want it to go. These are questions that begin with phrases like, how did you? Or what's it like? Or tell me about? Or in what ways? Those are all open-ended that invite someone to share something about their life.
A couple of things. I love the questions part.
Yeah.
A couple of things that hit me. One, I can't think of a person who asked better questions and taught through questions more than Jesus. Mm-hmm. Jesus was always asking questions. And Bets, right now at Northeast Pres, we're going through the book of Philemon. And Philemon is this wealthy man, and he owns a slave named Onesimus. And the Apostle Paul could just say to Philemon, you need to free Onesimus, set him free. You have that right. We need him for the kingdom. Set him free. I command you. I'm an apostle. But really what he does is he says, I appeal to you. And really what he does is he says to Philemon, what are you going to do? He really, at the end of the day, he's asking him a question, and he's forcing Philemon to come to the answer, which Paul is confident is going to be the answer that he believes is the right answer. So that's so great to ask people questions, and it's harder than it sounds.
Yep, it is. So the next thing that he mentioned that I thought was really good and that I wanted to share, he talks about the importance of empathy. And, I think sometimes we could think, well, that person is really empathetic and I don't feel like I have that gift as much. I'm not as gifted in that way. Well, one thing that he mentions, and I love this because I love to read, obviously, reading literature can increase empathy.
Wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, but so easy to do with ourselves and easy to do with our kids, our grandkids. So this is what he says, researchers have found that people who read are more empathetic. Plot-driven genre books, such as thrillers and detective stories, do not seem to increase empathy skills. But reading biographies or complex, character-driven novels and plays in which the reader gets enmeshed in the changing emotional life of the characters does. So if you read Jurassic Park, that's going to be entertaining, but you might not come away with a lot of empathy unless it was for the people who got eaten.
Or some of the dinosaurs, maybe.
But as I think about things that I've read, like reading memoirs, reading people's stories, it helps you to understand what other people's lives are like, what other people's experience is like. And I love reading about people whose life is very different from mine. And also so many times I come away from those stories saying, good heavens, I am so blessed. And I feel like I am, as God's word tells us, we're blessed to be a blessing. So we can read those stories and connect with other people's experiences that way. Even if it's a novel, it's okay.
Yeah, so whether it's a biography or whether it's a work of fiction, if it's a work of fiction, if the characters are full, rich characters, right? Like real people who've really struggled, who've been through it, that's going to open our hearts.
Yeah, so I love that.
Sense.
And I love that you can do that with kids. Kids can read books that have great characters and they can grow in their understanding of what life can be like for other people and they can increase in their empathy. So a couple more things that I wanted to bring out. So you already mentioned life stories. He has a whole chapter on listening to other people's stories. And this is what he said. Stories capture the unique presence of a person's character and how he or she changes over time. Stories capture how 1,000 little influences come together to shape a life, how people struggle and strive, how their lives are knocked about by lucky and unlucky breaks. When someone is telling you their story, you get a much more personal, complicated, attractive image of the person. You get to experience their experience. So again, coming away with that kind of smashes your stereotypes or smashes what you may assume about people when you hear the full story.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think a lot of growth and maturity in life is when I hear someone's story, gaining a level of compassion or understanding. And one of the things, our culture is totally missing this right now. For me to have compassion and empathy for you does not mean I have to agree with you. That doesn't mean that when I hear someone's story and then they say my position on this issue is X, that I necessarily have to agree with that position.
Sure.
I can still have my reasons that I hold a different position, but I'm going to engage with that person on our disagreement in a different level because I'm going to see them and I'm going to see their humanity and not see everything through a negative filter and just assume the worst motives all the time, right?
Yes.
So the value of hearing stories is not necessarily that we are always going to agree on everything.
Yeah, not at all.
Because we're not. And Christians aren't called to compromise our values at all, but we are called to be empathetic and compassionate and to be people who can really hear what another person has to say, and therefore to treat them like a human.
Right. And sometimes it may be like, well, how do I do that? Do I just walk up to somebody and be like, tell me your story? And maybe that is what you do sometimes. But he had a couple suggestions, which I really liked. He said this: when I'm in a conversation with someone, I'm trying to get us into the narrative mode. So
I like that.
Story.
Tell me more about that, Betsy.
Yeah. He says, I'm no longer content to ask, what do you think about X? Instead, I ask, how did you come to believe X? This is a framing that invites people to tell a story about what events led them to think the way they do. Similarly, I don't ask people to tell me about their values. I say, tell me about a person who shaped your values most. That prompts a story.
So, Bets, I want to ask you that question right now. Tell me about a person who shaped your values that maybe modeled what David Brooks is talking about.
Well, to be honest, when I started thinking about illuminators, I couldn't help but think about my mom. My mom's name is Farrell.
Very unique name.
Yes, like Carol, but with an F.
Mm-hmm.
And she has always been a wonderful example of someone who sees the best in people, who will try to include people who aren't included, just going up to anyone and asking them questions and listening with that warm and receiving posture, which is also so important. And he talks about how we listen to people. And she's just always ready to laugh and to smile. And she's someone who embodies this all so well.
She's an illuminator.
She is.
I've
She's
seen it myself.
Yep.
I love this. Get into the narrative mode.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is, if that's the only takeaway that we get from this book, I think that's a very valuable takeaway.
Yeah.
Because we are going to see people's humanity more from that storied perspective than just rattling off some facts about them.
Well,
right?
and I love asking the question, what do you think about, instead of saying, what do you think about, politics or whatever, instead of asking it that way, you say, well, how did you come to hold the political beliefs that you have?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I think that's so great. And it just gives you so much of a fuller picture of who the person is.
Yeah. How did you come to embrace these positions?
Uh-huh.
Who's a person you admire, and why do you admire them?
Right.
Yeah.
So 2 more things I wanted to highlight. He talks about ancestors. One of the chapters is about someone's ancestors. And I love this, and it really made me think. He said, each person's consciousness is formed by all the choices of her ancestors going back centuries. Who they married, where they settled, whether they joined this church or that one. In other words, a person is part of a long movement, a transmission from one generation to another, and can only be seen rightly as part of that movement. So, he talks about learning about people's ancestors, or even learning about your own, to see that that's the context out of which you come. And I love that too. So then the last thing I wanted to highlight is he talks about being part of a community of truth, being members of a community of truth. And obviously when I hear that language, I'm going to think about the church. But this is what he says. A community of truth is created when people are genuinely interested in seeing and exploring together. When we are in a community of truth, we're trying on each other's perspectives. We're taking journeys into each other's minds. It gets you out of the egotistical mindset, which says, I am normal, what I see is objective, everyone else is odd, and instead gives you the opportunity to take a journey with another person's eyes. How cool is that?
It's awesome.
Yeah.
We need that.
That's right. That's right.
Well, as we wrap this up, Bets, let me share a beautiful quote that in many ways sums up the book.
Yep.
Brooks writes, she who only looks inward will find only chaos. Mm-hmm. And she who looks only outward with eyes of critical judgment will find only flaws. Mm-hmm. But she who looks with the eyes of compassion and understanding will see complex souls, suffering and soaring, navigating life as best they can. She'll envelop people in a loving gaze, a visual embrace that will not only help her feel what they are experiencing, but give those around her the sense that she is right there with them and that she is sharing what they are going through. She has learned finally that it's not only the epic acts of heroism and altruism that define a person's character. It's the everyday acts of encounter. It's the simple capacity to make another person feel seen and understood that hard but essential skill that makes a person a treasured coworker, citizen, spouse, and friend.
Yeah.
So that's something we can all do.
Right.
You
love that.
You don't have to be a hero.
That's right.
You don't have to do all these big moments in life.
Yeah, I love that he says it's the everyday acts of encounter.
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
But so a great challenge for us today to see people, to truly see them. What is it in Avatar 2 or Avatar 1 where there's the line, I see you?
Yes.
And
That's right.
anyways, those are pretty good movies.
They are good.
That's our calling, is to see people and is to treat them. And then, so often people so struggle with, oh, I'm not an evangelist. I don't know how to reach people for the Lord. Blah, blah, blah. I don't have all these great arguments. Well, how about start here and we'll talk.
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
So this was a great book, guys. 2 thumbs up. And Josh, you want to share another book that you've been reading?
Sure. I'm in the middle of a book. I'm still pretty early in a book, maybe a third of the way through, but I found out about this book and I said, I'm just going to give it a go. It just came out. It's titled One Nation Under Guns, How Gun Culture Distorts Our History and Threatens Our Democracy by Dominic Erdozain. It just came out in 24.
Oh, wow. So it just came out.
A little bit about me. I'm not anti-gun and I'm very much pro-hunting. A lot of friends who hunt, and it's something I might get into more. We mostly love enjoying the fruits of hunting because we've had people give us like a whole deer of venison and things like. It's been awesome.
Right.
It's really helped with the grocery bills too. But it's just been really interesting for me to see how gun culture has grown and changed over our history. It's a wonderful look at the Second Amendment. What does that mean? How should we understand it? And it's also really fascinating to me that a very high percentage of Americans do seem to support certain restrictions on guns, not banning guns or anything like that, but yet this is just one of those issues that we can't seem to move on as a culture. So again, I'm not anti-gun at all, but I have found this book really interesting, and some people might want to read it. One Nation Under Guns.
That's a good one.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us today on Intersect, everybody, and we hope you'll join us next time.